When you think of National Socialism, think racist communists. Racist communists.
Racist communists.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Raver, el puto Raver, or how would I call this channel? Soviet Raver, or whatever you want to call me. And today I'm going to take a look at this video by TIK, T-Y-K, TIK, him, in which he tries to prove that the Nazis were socialists. But before that, here's a little disclaimer. English is not my first language, I'm not fluent, my pronunciation is bad. This is also my second channel. I usually make stuff like this in Spanish with edgy aesthetic and memes and everything. Feel free to check it if you want, link in the description. And another disclaimer, I'm a Marxist-Leninist. For me, the Soviet Union, Maoist China, Cuba, and all those scary countries that red liberals disregard as not real socialism are socialist for me. So don't give me that bullshit about not real socialism. Okay, before starting with this video, I'm going to drop a few definitions. Something important that he conveniently forgot to add in his video. What is socialism? Well, socialism is a mode of production in which the workers have control over the means of production. It's basically this. And of course, there's different types of socialism. You have mutualism, anarcho-communism, market socialism, Marxism, marxism-leninism, etc, etc, etc. All of them have this basic premise, and all of them are socialists. And what's the difference between socialism and communism? For some socialists, these terms are interchangeable. In Marxist theory, socialism, or lower stage of communism, is the transition state from capitalism to communism, the latter being a classless, moneyless, and stateless society. And socialism in this context is workers' control over the state, abolition of private property over the means of production, and abolition of wage labor. Wage. Among other things. Now, what's capitalism? Capitalism is a mode of production characterized by private property of the means of production, production for exchange in the market, and wage labor. That is, treating labor as a commodity. There are several versions of capitalism, all of them have different levels of state intervention. Yes, there's always a state.
And I know that your heart is shaking right now. Your body is trembling.
You have to post your feelings about that
That version of capitalism that exists
in your head that have never existed.
in real life and will never exist.
Because facts
Don't care about
your feelings.
Now, what is fascism? Basically, fascism is what capitalism does when it has problems. When there's a socialist revolution incoming or in progress. When bourgeois democracy fails to solve the shit that capitalism does with society, and suddenly you have these guys talking about class collaboration, about a perfect version of your country that totally existed back in the days. And they blame everyone except the capitalist system itself. And yes, Hitler was one of these guys. And when they take power, they do everything in their hand to fuck over the workers in the interest of the capitalist class, while privatizing public assets and financing their capitalist benefactors with public money. In the economic sense, you can call them corporatists, which is still capitalism, whether you like it or not. But more on this later. The original claim is National Socialism is socialism. Totally socialism. But is this really the case? Let's hear what TIK actually has to say.
What is National Socialism? National Socialism. National Communism. Whoa, wait a second, what? Yeah, let me explain.
Yeah, I'ma let you explain, but first, let me take my bingo card. I'm not cheating, I swear, it's the first time I watch this video, but not the first time I hear this bullshit.
According to Marxists, modern society is capitalist, and communism is the goal. Socialism is what happens on the way to communism. Yes, I'm being super simple here, but you get the basic gist.
He actually got that kinda right. I'm impressed. Go on.
For Hitler, socialism was the goal rather than the transition period. So yeah, Hitler is actually moving towards communism. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second.
If socialism in the Marxist sense is Hitler's goal, which is not true, more on that later, if that is his goal, how is he moving towards communism? Are socialism and communism the same thing to you? You know you're contradicting yourself, right?
And in reality, the Soviets never reached true communism, so they were socialist as well. So when you look at the history of the Second World War and the Axis-Soviet front, you have to realise that this is two separate socialist states going at each other. And this seems to be one of the biggest and most fundamental misunderstandings people have about the Second World War.
He's right about the Soviets, as I said before, but that's not quite true. The Soviets were communist ideologically. They reached socialism, yes, but you can reach communism, a stateless society, when almost all of the world wants to see your country destroyed. They were already invaded by 11 countries in the Civil War, and they knew it was going to happen all over again. And they were right.
They think it's a far-right versus far-left war. But is this really the case? Well, actually no. It's actually quite difficult to tell the difference between National Socialism and Soviet Socialism, because they're both socialist states with authoritarian leaders. And this is, in fact, a historical debate. Were these two states the same or not? And, well, this isn't as crazy as it sounds when you realise that Marxist socialism is but one variant of socialism, because socialism is a spectrum in itself.
Yes, socialism is a spectrum, as I stated before. A spectrum with its basics in workers' control over the means of production. Did the Nazis have workers' control over the means of production? Nope. Not under any circumstance. But we'll talk about this later.
Hitler was as much a socialist as Marx. They both shared the same ultimate goal, the socialization of the people into a harmonious community free of exploitation, but they differed significantly in the methods required to achieve it.
Right. Okay. To be honest, I searched for that book and I found it. And I read the description. Here it is. It's also the first page, by the way. Then I used that take a look inside feature. And from the first pages, he doesn't seem to understand what socialism is. For example, he quotes the British National Party saying that they are the Labour Party that your fathers voted for, or some shit. That the BNP is all for higher pensions, nationalizing industry. Yeah. By that logic, Winston fucking Churchill was a socialist. And there is more. This author acknowledges the typical arguments about the Nazis. You know, they privatized the major industries, they went after the communists, the social democrats and anarchists. But he brushes away all that to explain that Hitler was following his own perception of socialism. His own perception. His own
Perception.
of socialism. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work like this. I can have my own perception of socialism too. In my harmonious, perfect society, with butterflies and roses of course, everybody's free from exploitation. Except women, who God forbid if they leave the kitchen. It serves workers who have to work 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, with no paid vacations, and all the products of their labor go to Porky. Perfect socialism. And besides, Marx said nothing about socializing the people. I would like a source for that, because he talked about socializing the means of production in the hands of the workers. Anyway, let's see how you defend that quote.
The origins of National Socialism lie in the pre-Hitler German Workers' Party. People like Rudolf Jung, Karl Harrer, and Anton Drexler defined what National Socialism was. Hitler wasn't the guy who invented it, he just sold it to the masses. The Munich version of the German Workers' Party was founded on the 5th of January 1919 by Drexler and Harrer. Even at this point, the name of the party was up for debate. Drexler argued that the word socialist would show solidarity with the working class and keep ties with the other German National Socialist parties in other states. On the other hand, Harrer argued that the word socialist shouldn't be part of the title because, by not having it in the title, this would reduce middle-class hostility towards the party. And without the word socialist in the title, they could present the case that they were advocating social welfare rather than social equality. But the reality was they were doing the latter. Once Hitler became the leader on the 24th of February 1920, the German Workers' Party was renamed. It became the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Yes, the word socialist was added back into the title by Hitler himself.
What? Can display symbol? Hold my beer. Tja. I'm not one of those who gets all triggered by a flag. Okay, let's talk about the origins of their party. And let's address your source for most of this specific segment. Wikipedia. Let's see what you choose to ignore. To his concerns among potential middle-class supporters, Drexler made clear that unlike Marxists, the party supported the middle class and that its socialist policy was meant to give social welfare to German citizens deemed part of the Aryan race. They became one of the many Bolshevist movements that existed in Germany. Like other Bolshevist groups, the DAP advocated the belief that through profit sharing instead of socialization, Germany should become a unified people's community, rather than a society divided along class and party lines. With that part about welfare and the middle class, they don't specify what they mean by middle class, but I'll take that they mean small business owners, small capitalists. This goes with what I said before about class collaboration. The reaction of class struggle, something very important to all socialists. And what is this Bolshevist thing? Well, Bolshevist literally means ethnic, and they advocate a unified people's community. And that's the thing. When Nazis talk about people, peoples and so on, they refer to their race or ethnic group in general, independent of class. In contrast, when socialists talk about people, they refer to the working class. And besides, name me a single politician that doesn't talk about the people and about profit sharing instead of socialism. Sorry. About profit sharing instead of socialization, something that you conveniently choose to ignore. Profit sharing is when businesses give a cut of their profits to their workers, instead of socialization when the workers control the means of production. And Hitler also rejected this mildly social democrat profit sharing thing. So your own source, Wikipedia, contradicts your claims. And you say that the Nazis wanted social equality instead of welfare. Citation needed. Because, as I've stated before, and I'll explain later, the Nazis weren't even for class equality. They benefited the capitalist class while freezing wages and generally fucking the workers. Actions over rhetoric. Facts over feelings.
The new Nazi flag, the black swastika in the white circle inside a red field, was created by him as well, and in essence this was a red socialist flag with a white nationalist flag and a pro-Aryan anti-Semitic flag inside it as well. But this was both socialist, nationalist and racist. We National Socialists regard our flag as being the embodiment of our party programme. The red expressed the social thought underlying the movement, white the national thought, and the swastika signified the mission allotted to us, the struggle for the victory of Aryan mankind, and at the same time the triumph of the ideal of creative work, which is in itself and always will be anti-Semitic.
About the color red. This is from Mein Kampf. We chose red for our posters after particular and careful deliberation, our intention being to irritate the left, so as to arouse their attention and tempt them to come to our meetings, if only in order to break them up, so that in this way we got a chance of talking to the people.
But Raver, he's talking about the flag, Raver! But Raver, the flag, Raver!
Okay, let's talk about the flag. You already know what TIK chose to quote while ignoring what came before it. After explaining how their movement had no banner to represent them, Hitler talks about the colors of the old German flags. The black, red and gold flag established in the German Revolution of 1848, and how he doesn't like them because those colors represent Marxism somehow. He then talks about the red, black and white colors of the old Reich. And what colors are these? What flag is he talking about? This flag. Do you see anything familiar? Hitler likes those colors because a lot of Germans alive on those days fought for them in the Great War, including himself. However, he doesn't like the flag itself because, according to him, represented a regime that was overthrown by Marxism. And after talking about the party debates, about the colors to use, about the designs, etc., Hitler says, I, myself, was always for keeping the old colors, not only because I, as a soldier, regard them as my most sacred possession, but because in their aesthetic effect they conformed more than anything to my personal taste. After innumerable trials, I decided upon a final form, a flag of red material, with a white disc bearing in its center a black swastika. And now comes your quote, but you forgot to include this. And indeed, a symbol it proved to be, not only because it incorporated those revered colors expressive of our homage to the glorious past in which once brought so much honor to the German nation, but this symbol was also an eloquent expression of the will behind the movement. So, the colors were chosen first because those were the colors of the German Empire, their glorious past. They gave the meaning to those colors after choosing them, and not the other way around. The oh my god, social thought. Yeah, German nationalism. That was their social thought.
Also, on the same night that the party was refounded came the 25 points, the only published National Socialist German Workers' Party manifesto. Points 1 to 3 demand national unity for all Germans, points 4 to 8 were directed against the Jews and recent immigrants, and points 9 to 21, almost half of the points, were socialist in content. These aim to bring about social welfare, nationalisation of the industry, and land reforms, and so on. Hitler had his hand in all of these points.
Let's take a look at those points actually. But before, welfare is not necessarily socialist. If that's your logic, most of the world today is socialist. I wish. Okay, 25 points. A ver. Point 3, we demand land and territory, colonies, for the maintenance of our people and the settlement of our surplus population. Basically, they are rooting for imperialism. the exploitation of foreign territories for the benefit of the German population, especially the capitalist class, something that actual socialists oppose. From point 4 to 8 is not only about Jews, but I let you get away with that one. Those points are completely civilian anyway. Point 9, all citizens must possess equal rights and duties. Bullshit rights and duties. Ask German women about that one. 10, the first duty of every citizen must be to work mentally or physically. No individual shall do any work that offends against the interests of the community to the benefit of all. Vague as shit. If they were socialists, they would be aiming at capitalists with this one, but they aren't. 11, that all unearned income and income as raised for war be abolished, same as before. 12, since every war imposes on the people fearful sacrifices in blood and treasure, all personal profit arising from the war must be regarded as treason to the people. We therefore demand the total confiscation of all war profits. Tell that to Krupp and the like. 13, we demand blah blah blah. 14, blah blah blah. Increasing pensions, they didn't do any of this. 16, we demand the creation and maintenance of a sound middle class. The immediate communization of large stores will be rented cheaply to small tradespeople, and the strongest consideration must be given to ensure that the small traders shall deliver the supplies needed by the state. Middle class. So they want to create even more capitalists. Small capitalists, but capitalists nonetheless. Totally socialist. 17, we demand an agrarian reform in accordance with our national requirements, and the enactment of a law to expropriate the owners without compensation of any land needed for the common purpose, the abolition of ground rents, and the prohibition of all speculation in land. They didn't do any of this. 18, we demand that ruthless war be waged against those who work to injure the common welfare, traitors, usurers, profiteers, etc. are to be punished with death regardless of creed or race. Except the German capitalists, of course. Point 19 is meaningless in this discussion. Points 20 and 21 sound like social democracy, a very shitty one. 22, we want to get rid of the old army and replace it with a people's army that would look after the ordinary people, not just the rich officer class. Didn't do that, and in this case, by people's army, they mean that only what the Nazis considered to be Germans can serve in that army. We talked about this people's thing earlier. Point 23, talking about banning things they don't like for no good reason. Point 24, we demand freedom for all religious denominations in the state, provided they do not threaten its existence, nor offend the moral feelings of the German race. The far right with their feelings. This set writes itself. I don't see the welfare in this one, by the way. It's just neo-Christian heresy. And finally, point 25. Let's see what's socialist about this one. Well, every state, capitalist, socialist or otherwise, is like this. So not an argument. But wait, let's go back to point 17 for a moment, shall we? The one about land reform, something that actual socialists want to do. Hitler had this to say about it. On April 13, 1928, Adolf Hitler clarified section 17 in the program in order to stop political mischaracterizations. Because of the mendations? Is that a word? Oh yeah, it is. Because of the mendacious interpretations on the part of our opponents of point 70 of the program of the Nazi Party, the following explanation is necessary. Since the Nazi Party is fundamentally based on the principle of private property, it is obvious that the expression confiscation without compensation refers merely to the confiscation of possible legal means of confiscating when necessary land illegally acquired or not administered in accordance with the national welfare. It is therefore directed in the first instance against the US companies which speculate in land. So there it is. right from the horse's mouth. Hitler is all for private property, something that goes against one of the main objectives of socialism, the abolition of private property. There's more to say about this document, how the Nazis didn't do half of the things listed, and how they retracted for some of the points. It's just like that bullshit election pamphlet they send you, when parties spew all that nonsense about what they are going to totally do, and when they are actually elected, they do what they want, what their owners want actually.
When Hitler came to power, the government got rid of trade unions, but replaced them with the German Labour Front, a state-owned body which promoted cleaner working environments, better canteen food, factory renovations, and social security for the unemployed. This was socialism.
Yeah, about that Labour Front. That is similar to what Franco did in Spain, the Organización Sindical Española, also known as Vertical Labour Union. I'm gonna talk about this, but first, what is a labor union? It's basically a workers' organization to protect their interests against the capitalists, the employers. Now, in these labor unions that the fascists had, who was at the top? Let's see. The fucking capitalists. At first, both Hitler and Ley tried to assure the workers that their rights would be protected. Robert Ley, head of the Labour Front, said, "Workers, I swear to you, we will not only keep everything that exists, we'll build up the protections and the rights of the workers still further." Within 3 weeks, the hollowness of another Nazi promise was exposed when Hitler decreed a law bringing an end to collective bargaining and providing that, henceforth, labor trustees appointed by him would regulate labor contracts and maintain labor peace. Since the decisions of the trustees were to be legally binding, the law, in effect, outlawed strikes. Ley promised to restore absolute leadership to the natural leader of a factory, that is, the employer. Only the employer can decide. So, workers didn't even control their own labor union. They weren't even consulted in important matters such as their salaries, their hours, and other important stuff. Basically, this German Labour Front was a massive propaganda organization to deceive the workers. Hey, your pay is decreasing, your hours are shit, and your boss has more control over you than before, but hey, you can go on a cruise trip. Yay! And by the way, all those things that you say that they gave the workers, canteen food and all that, they also had that before the Nazis took power, and most countries today have similar things. So, what's your point?
Similarly, the party's Strength Through Joy, or KDF policy, saw state-subsidised holidays for all social classes. Cruises, activities and excursions all were popular with the people. And this is the point. When you hear people say that the Nazis did good things prior to the war, they're talking about these socialist policies. Why? Because this was a redistribution of wealth which benefits the working class.
Redistribution of wealth that benefits the working class. Well, we'll see about that. There was redistribution of wealth in Nazi Germany, alright, from the workers to the capitalists. In fact, hourly wages increased only 1% during each year of Nazi rule. And if we take into account the rising taxes, insurance, rising prices, and the membership dues for that mandatory German Labour Front scam, their wages actually decreased by 3 to 4%. It varies between industries, in some of them monthly wages increase. But there's a twist. They lengthened the working hours, even in peacetime. All of this while the capitalists were making record profits, private profits, not for the state, not for the workers, not for the common good, but for the capitalist class, giving the workers a few breadcrumbs.
Hitler wanted an economy that could control without owning, thereby removing the need to annihilate the entrepreneurial classes within a civil war, as the Bolsheviks had done. He regarded Marx and Lenin as having the right outcomes in mind, but had gone about the project in the wrong way.
I bet that book doesn't have a source for that claim. Do you have it? I'll put my hand on the fire and I'll dare to say that no, it doesn't. I hunted for that source all around the internet, in English, in Spanish, and I can't find anything. So that book is making it all up. And if you actually read Mein Kampf, and I know for a fact that you've read the bits that you think support your claim, you'll understand two things. First, Hitler had no fucking idea what Marxism is. He admits to not have read anything by Marx, or Engels for that matter. And two, Hitler had no fucking idea what socialism was, so he just redefines it to suit his personal feelings. And going back to that quote, the right outcomes in mind. Hitler talks about it in Mein Kampf. Marxism, whose final objective was, is, and will continue to be the destruction of all non-Jewish national states. Yeah, wow, the right outcome in mind. And he only mentions Lenin once in the book, and in a different context, so I'll need a citation for that claim.
When the Munich...
Wait, only 6 minutes? God damn it, it keeps happening.
The readiness to sacrifice one's personal work and, if necessary, even one's life for others shows its most highly developed form in the Aryan race. The greatness of the Aryan is not based on his intellectual powers, but rather on his willingness to devote all his faculties to the service of the community. National Socialism is a community where Aryans help each other. The Aryan lives for the state, and self-preservation gives way to the community and the greater race. The spirit underlying this attitude is expressed by the word work, which to him does not at all signify a means of earning one's daily livelihood, but rather a productive activity which cannot clash with the interests of the community. For the work which the individual performs is not the purpose of his existence, but only a means. His real purpose in life is to better himself and raise himself to a higher level as a human being, but this he can only do in and through the community whose cultural life he shares. National Socialism allows people to earn a living, but they're all working towards a higher cause, the race, and the community and the race and the state come first. Therefore, National Socialism is absolutely not capitalism.
How is any of that socialist in any way? Do you have a source to back that up? Did Marx or Engels ever said something like that? And how is it not capitalism? You didn't define capitalism, but I did. In Nazi Germany, the capitalists got to keep their private enterprises, and even more, since a lot of the factories owned by capitalist Jews were given to the benefactors of the Nazis. And the Nazi government privatized a lot of public enterprises, from railroads to steel. And they had a market, and they extracted the surplus value of the workers even more than before. And when the Nazis talk about community, they talk about their race, independent of class. Oh, but they had a state, so therefore not capitalists? I bet that this is where you're going with this. The funny thing is that the Nazi state, with all that class collaboration bullshit, crushing the workers' movement, the labor unions, was done in the interest of the capitalist class.
It's more like a beehive. Individuals and even businesses are working to produce honey for the leader so that the race as a whole may survive. They don't like foreigners, and there can only be one queen bee, and if you rebel or if your business doesn't fit the mould, the leader, the state, can get rid of you for the good of the greater Aryan hive.
So let's talk about this Aryan business. Hitler says animals breed with their own species, crossbreeding is not allowed in the animal kingdom, and when it happens the offspring is sterile. Because the strong must dominate the weak, there is a natural urge for there not to be any mixing of breeds. Therefore, a superior race should not intermingle with an inferior one, and this is when he starts talking about Jews. With the Jewish people, the race of sacrifice does not extend beyond the simple instinct of individual preservation. Jews act in concordance when a common danger threatens them or a common prey attracts them. Where these two motives no longer exist, and the most brutal egotism appears, and these people who before had lived together in unity will turn into a swarm of rats that bitterly fight against each other, apparently. And it just goes on and on about the Jews. If the Jews were the only people in the world, they would be wallowing in filth and mire, and would exploit one another and try to exterminate one another in a bitter struggle. The irony of the statement being that Hitler would later go on to exploit and exterminate the Jews themselves, those are the races.
Yeah, the whole book is filled with this prejudice. So in Hitler's mind, the Jews don't work towards the Aryan German state because they don't care about the national community. In his eyes, they are vermin, and he goes on to call them parasites. Therefore, they're bad for the Aryan hive and must be eliminated.
At the beginning of the First World War, or even during the war, if 12 or 15,000 of these Jews who were corrupting the nation had been forced to submit to poison gas, just as hundreds of thousands of our best German workers from every social stratum and from every trade and calling had to face it in the field, then millions of sacrifices made up front would not have been in vain. On the contrary, if 12,000 of these malefactors had been eliminated in proper time, probably the lives of a million decent men who would be of value to Germany in the future might have been saved.
Hitler is saying that if they'd killed a bunch of Jews in the First World War, they would have saved many good, honest German lives, somehow. So you can see the logic going into the Second World War. He also says that the Jews invented communism, which they didn't. But the important point is he thinks they did. And this is the point where he tries to separate his socialism from their socialism. And he does this by race. If you're part of the Aryan race, you can be a citizen of the socialist state that he's going to create.
All this dribble for what? What does it prove? How does that demonstrate that he's a socialist? Because he says so? And how can socialism be based on race? You'll have to explain that to me. You see, this is the problem with not defining things from the start. Something that I'm starting to think that you did on purpose. Socialism, as I stated before, is workers' control over the means of production. Not the capitalists of this race control over the means of production. And most certainly, not the queen control over the hive. Socialism focus, it's in the class concept. You can take that away, replace it with ethnicity and call it socialism, while also ignoring everything that socialism actually stands for. And you should explain how you arrived to this conclusion without defining your terms.
The People's State will classify its population in three groups: citizens, subjects of the state, and aliens.
The rights of citizenship shall be conferred on every young man whose health and character have been certified as good after having completed his period of military service. On the occasion of conferring a diploma of citizenship, the new citizen must take a solemn oath of loyalty to the national community and the state.
The bees get the benefit of having the honey and the protection of the state, but only if they're bees of this state. Foreign bees and other parasites are not allowed.
You keep talking about bees as if they somehow prove your feelings about socialism. This is starting to be a little cringy.
The racial Weltanschauung is fundamentally distinguished from the Marxist by reason of the fact that the former recognises the significance of race and therefore also personal worth, and has made these the pillars of its structure. This is it. Hitler has spelt it out. What differentiates National Socialism from other Marxisms is race. It is socialism, but only for the Aryan.
Cherry-picking the quote that supports your feelings, eh? Okay, let's take a look at the bigger picture. Let's see what Hitler actually means. Marxism represents the most striking phase of the Jewish endeavor to eliminate the dominant significance of personality in every sphere of human life and replace it by the numerical power of the masses. And then Hitler talks about parliamentary politics and blah 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 blah. So Hitler sees Marxism everywhere in society, very much like other brainlets of today. Dare I say cultural Marxism, postmodernism, nihilism? Let's continue. In the field of economics, we see the trade union movement, which does not serve the real interests of the employees, but the destructive aim of international jewelry. Yuri. I have problems with these dual words and the derivatives. just to the same degree in which the principle of personality is excluded from the economic life of the nation, and the influence and activities of the masses substituted in instead national economy, which should be for the service and benefit of the community as a whole, will gradually deteriorate in its creative capacity. So he attacks actual workers' organizations, the actual socialists, because he thinks that they don't serve the real interests of the workers. He says that the national economy should service the community as a whole, that is, the Aryan race, including capitalists. For in the long run it is impossible to satisfy popular demands merely by high-sounding theoretical phrases. Look who's talking. These can be satisfied only by supplying goods to meet the individual needs of daily life, and by so doing create the conviction that through the productive collaboration of its members, the Volkis community serves the interests of the individual. And he says it again, the Volk community, the race as a whole. A very right-wing concept. Even if, on the basis of its mass theory, Marxism should prove itself capable of taking over and developing the present economic system, that would not signify anything. Even if Marxism were 1,000-fold capable of taking over the economic life as we now have it, and maintaining it in operation under Marxist direction, such an achievement would prove nothing, because on the basis of its own principles, Marxism will never be able to create something which could supplant what exists today. So this paragraph proves that Hitler has no idea what Marxism is. He's also attacking Marxism itself as incapable of doing anything good. Besides, he says that Marxism is incapable of replacing the order that existed back then. When he says this, he means the Jewish rule, and Nazis will tell you that that's true. The Jews controlled the Soviet Union, when in fact less than 5% of the members of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union were Jews. But if we talk about replacing the capitalist system, yes, the Soviets did that. And Marxism itself has furnished the proof that it cannot do this. Not only has it been unable anywhere to create a cultural or economic system of its own, but it was not even able to develop, according to its own principles, the civilization and economic system it found at hand. It has had to make compromises by way of a return to the principle of personality, just as it cannot dispense with that principle in its own organization. So the Soviets weren't able to develop a backwards peasant country into a superpower that sent the first man to space. Yeah, I know that this was written in 1925, when the Soviet Union was still young, but it still debunks Hitler's feelings. In conclusion, Hitler only knew one thing about Marxism, that he hates it. He hates it from the bottom of his heart. So Hitler just spelled it out for us. He's differentiating his ideology from actual socialism. He does the same with other ideologies too, by the way.
If the National Socialist movement should fail to understand the fundamental importance of this essential principle, if it should merely varnish the external appearance of the present state and adopt the majority principle, it would really do nothing more than compete with Marxism on its own ground. For that reason, it would not have the right to call itself a Weltanschauung. If the social program of the movement consisted of eliminating personality and putting the multitude in its place, then National Socialism would be corrupted with the poison of Marxism, just as our national bourgeois parties are. The difference between Marxism and Nazism is the race, individual Aryan bees working towards the hive. Not all are equal in this type of bee socialism. There are individual bees who are better than others, but they do have an equal chance to climb the ladder. And individual bees do have rights and businesses, but the state can interfere in those rights and dictate what your businesses can and can't do for the benefit of the great Aryan bee.
Stop right there. You said it. Private property over the means of production is allowed. Therefore, not socialism. I'm sorry. But these are the facts, and they don't care about your feelings. And that last bit, it sounds a lot like social democracy, like the one in Europe. I'm not saying that social democrats are Nazis, etc. So I can have this business, let's say a machining workshop, and when a few gallons of cutting fluid degrade, I decide to throw them into the local pond. But here comes the evil socialist state with their freedom-hating laws saying that I cannot do that because it's against the common good. States always intervene in the economy. So, all countries are socialist?
Yeah, this really is a socialist state. But access to this state is based on race, not class. The Marxist classless society ideal was redefined as a national community, but really, these were the same thing. Hitler's broadest vision was that of the Volksgemeinschaft, the national community to be ruled by an elite blood order. That to him would transcend the need for class barriers, which he saw as artificial and which stifled real creative talent.
How the fuck is a classless society the same as a society with classes? How? That nonsense about class collaboration is just rhetoric. As I've stated before, the workers got the worst part of the deal, while the capitalists received massive profits from their labor, and the conditions of the former only got worse even in peacetime. So the antagonism between classes still exists. And what Marx advocated for, the classless society, you forgot to mention that it is also a stateless and moneyless society. We call that communism. And Hitler never said that he wanted to achieve that. In fact, it goes against his law for a strict hierarchy. So again, how are different things the same? You said it actually, by redefining things.
Mein Kampf goes on to say a lot more than this, but the point has been rammed home enough. Hitler's creation was a merger of two seductive ideologies, international socialism and nationalistic pride. Fusing both of these two together, Hitler didn't need to nationalize the industries.
If you try to fuse national pride with international socialism, you don't get national socialism. You get national Bolshevism, the ideology of the future. What Hitler did was take capitalism and turn it up to 11, while telling the workers not to complain because they were the master race.
Why do we need all that socialisation of the banks and factories? What does it matter once I have the people firmly fitted into a discipline form which they cannot escape? We are socialising the people. So do not think that the German Nazi state in the 1930s and 40s is capitalism. It really isn't capitalism. It's a state-controlled economy. For the Nazis, socialism was state intervention in private business rather than state ownership of business. Employer and employee remained so long as they were part of the Aryan race.
Well, that's what he said. If we take Hitler at face value, we could believe it. But is this really the case? Well, in reality, the Nazis controlled the economy even less than other capitalist countries of that time, privatizing state industries, while the rest of the capitalist countries were actually nationalizing private enterprises. And well, during the war, of course, all countries took almost complete control over the economy, even Nazi Germany. But is this really the case? While the British and obviously the Soviets centralized control of war economy in the hands of the state, the Germans actually didn't and couldn't centralize war production. Albert Speer tried to persuade Hitler about the need of centralizing production and resource allocation. And this was in 1941, almost 3 years into the war, and he couldn't convince the Führer for good reasons. If Hitler started taking control over private industries in the hands of the state, it would be the end of him. So Hitler said that he wanted the state to control the economy for the common good, but his actions proved that this wasn't the case.
So yes, these guys are communists, basically.
Mierda.
Or at least they're more communist than they may have realised. You may not have made this connection before now either, and I don't blame you. National Socialists also don't like communists, so it's natural to think that these two ideologies are not similar. But they are. The reason Hitler hates the communists is because he says communism was created by the Jews, his mortal enemy. But placing the Jewish element aside for a moment, I would argue that the reason Hitler drones on and on about how much he hates communism and how much that his party and their parties are not the same is because he needs to differentiate his socialism from their socialism. Having read the primary source, I get the impression that the ramblings he goes on about for the vast majority of the book are only there to make sure everyone is clear that he isn't a Marxist socialist, because there isn't much of a difference between what he's saying and what they are saying. So he's trying to come up with a difference. In fact, his hatred of the Jews and the ideal of the Aryan race is actually the main difference between the two ideologies.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Communism is a classless, moneyless and stateless society. Hitler rambles on and on about the state and how he wants to use it, but he never talks about getting rid of it, or even reaching a phase of development in which the state withers away. And what is the state? For us Marxists, the state is a tool of oppression used by one class to oppress another class. Masters and slaves, lords and serfs, capitalists and workers, workers and capitalists. For Hitler, the state is a tool that he wants to use to force his feelings on everyone else. That's what he says in his book. In reality, he used the state for this and also to serve the interests of the capitalist class, as we've seen before. And you said that there's similarities between Soviet socialism and Hitler's ideology. Okay, Mr. Historian, Mr. Critical Thinking Guy. Cálmate, River, cálmate. Tranquilo, River, tranquilo, tranqui. Ya pasó. Have you read anything about the Soviet economic system? About Marxist-Leninist ideology? Have you? Of course you didn't. You are just making a claim without doing your research and contrasting information. And I, after reading the primary sources about Nazism, the actual primary sources about Marxism and marxism-leninism, and a ton of complementary sources, I can say that you are full of shit.
Now, when you look at the Second World War, what you have to realise is that you have two socialist states fighting against each other. However, this is just their economic policy. Hitler's National Socialists are definitely nationalists, which is a right-wing idea. So really you've got a party or a state which is both left-wing and right-wing at the same time. How can this be? Well, this is why the traditional political spectrum doesn't make any sense, like in the World War II context. Why is Nazism next to fascism? That doesn't make any sense either. And why is anarchism next to communism? Again, that doesn't make any sense. So let's get rid of it. Instead, let's look at each aspect as a separate spectrum. Economics and politics are basically not the same. I guess you could even have left and right within this as well. But all you need to know is that these two states are economically socialist and politically authoritarian.
And that was political and economic theory, as seen by someone who knows nothing about political or economic theory. Why is fascism next to Nazism? Well, let's compare the economies of fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. Both had private property over the means of production. Both suppressed the workers' movement to protect the capitalist system. Both had markets and wage labor. Mussolini used the same rhetoric as Hitler when it came to the common good and the state control of corporations. So how are you not calling Benito a socialist? Ironically, Mussolini and his state had more control over the economy, at least briefly, the crash of 29. He was even more corporatist than Hitler. Corporatism is still capitalism, etc. And why is anarchism next to communism? Well, anarchists and communists want to achieve the same goal, as I stated before. We just take different roads to achieve it. And what is this fucking bullshit? Are you kidding me? So, in the political spectrum that you're trying to sell here, a republic can be democratic, and a monarchy and monarchy next to totalitarian dictatorship, TM. I guess Sweden is as authoritarian as Saudi Arabia. Wow, what an eye-opener. Now... Sorry. Now let's see the economic spectrum, implying that socialism is a mix of communism and capitalism. At least that's what the image says to me. Now let me play with this for a moment. I consider most political spectrum charts as nonsense bias towards a specific point of view, and you just made a perfect example of this. At the end of the day, the only real political spectrum that actually represents every one of us is this. And if you want to go full horseshoe theory on me, imagine this. Or this.
A strong national Reich, which recognises and protects to the largest possible measure the rights of its citizens, both within and outside its frontiers, can allow freedom to reign at home without trembling for the safety of the state. On the other hand, a strong national government can intervene to a considerable degree in the liberties of the individual subject, as well as the liberties of the constituent states, without thereby weakening the ideal of the Reich. Bees give up their freedom for the greater hive, definitely authoritarian. To contrast this to the USA at the time of World War II, the USA would be right economically and probably mostly left on the political spectrum, since she's not a democracy, she is a republic, the republic for which she stands. Britain in the 1940s would probably be classed as mostly socialist economically, due to state intervention in the economy for the war effort and the post-war social welfare state, but also where the USA is on the political spectrum due to the parliamentary system. And when you think of the Cold War, the same applies. Think of it in terms of democracy versus totalitarian governments, rather than capitalism versus socialism, since socialist governments also fall to the side of the USA.
So yes, National Socialism is actually authoritarian socialism, which itself is not that much different to Stalinist socialism. In fact, is there much of a difference between these two states? This is an ongoing historical debate. Just how similar are these two ideologies? And I'm not going to get into that debate here, but it's safe to say that in terms of their philosophies, their political influences, as well as their economic policies, government and other aspects, National Socialism and Stalinism are very similar indeed. And in terms of World War II, what we need to realise is that this was a war between two giant authoritarian power blocks. It is a war between different dictators. It is a war of ideologies. It is a racial war. It is a war of annihilation. But it's also a war to see which version of socialism is the better version of socialism. And this is a central part of the war. So basically, to sum up, when you think of National Socialism, think racist communists, and you won't be far off.
I just love the fact that you didn't cite a single fucking source about the Soviet economy or political organization. Aside from the classical, they were authoritarian, boo. And you read a lot of Hitler's Screeching, but you didn't read anything from Lenin, Stalin, Marx or Engels. So, how do you arrive at this conclusion? And by your logic and using that same economic spectrum, the U.S.A. were actually more socialist than Nazi Germany. Okay, end of his video. First of all, he does not define socialism or communism or capitalism. He claims to be all about critical thinking, but his sources are biased as fuck against socialism without knowing what they are talking about. Yeah, I checked them. He takes Hitler at face value without taking into consideration what he actually did as a leader. He cherry-picks quotes from Mein Kampf while ignoring the parts in which Hitler explicitly denounces Marxism, Bolshevism and actual socialism. He says that fascism and Nazism should not be close to each other on that chart, when in fact both were the same fucking thing. He does not cite a single Marxist or socialist source, because either he doesn't want to be honest about it, or he does not want to get his feelings shattered by reading them. He doesn't like the Nazis, he doesn't like the communists, so he feels that those completely antagonistic ideologies, from economics to social and political matters, are completely the same. So wanting to demonstrate this position, he tries to find sources that agree with him, and he decides to put on his video quotes from one of the sketchiest books in Amazon. And I know about sketchy books in Amazon. Without contrasting information or looking at what the other side has to say. And he calls himself a historian. In conclusion, just the same fucking bullshit that has been debunked time and time again. But these people always put their feelings about the facts, so they keep making the same mistakes. Now, don't think I'll let you off the hook that easily, not yet. Let's analyze the comment section of your... ¡Cago en la puta! ¿30 minutos? Okay, let's see.
This means one race, one people, one class. There's still classes within it, but they all...
It is socialism.
This isn't Marxist socialism. Well, neither was Leninism.
And socialism is yes,
Absolutely how? With capitalism inside socialism. We're socializing the people. Therefore, he has no reason to nationalize the industry.
Enough.
Chaos, basically.
I'll put the video in the description and I'll address what he calls arguments for a few minutes, because he's even more wrong in this one, and he doesn't address the actual criticisms people made in the comments. Let's see. Well, he starts by having no fucking idea what liberalism and conservatism are, and then...
So after the First World War, this chaos is, this age of extremes is happening, but you've got the rise of the left, the rise of the socialists. And what they're saying is that the old order of the liberals and the conservatives isn't working. We've got plenty of evidence to say this isn't working. So what we're going to do is actually intervene in the economy. We have to intervene. We have to have state intervention. Now, the communists were going, Marxists, they were saying, well, we need to seize the means of production. We need to take over the entire economy and have it run by the state, which is the people, the working classes, blah, blah, blah. So this is real state intervention. And people were saying in the comments, that's not what it is. Yeah. So it is. It really is. It is. If you look at the context of the time, this is the antithesis. It's like that was what it was and that didn't work. Therefore, this works. We need state intervention. And that's what it is. That is what it is. And people are saying, well, yeah, but it's state intervention that therefore makes you socialist. Well, it might do. Think about it.
It's basically what it is. State intervention really is socialism. I give no sources to support my claim, but believe me, I'm right and you're wrong. As I've stated before, socialism is not state intervention or ownership per se. It's more complicated than that. While it's true that at least Marxists want to take control of the state, we also want to give the means of production to the workers and abolish wage labor, etc. And this may blow away your brain, but state ownership doesn't necessarily mean that it's not capitalist anymore. An actual primary source about socialism, Friedrich Engels, says, the transformation into state ownership does not do away with the capitalistic nature of the productive forces. The modern state, doesn't matter its form, is essentially a capitalist machine. The state of the capitalists, the ideal personification of the total national capital. The more it proceeds to the taking over of the productive forces, the more it does actually become the national capitalist. The more citizens does it exploit. The workers remain wage workers, proletarians. The capitalist relation is not done away with. Even Stalin says something similar while addressing the people who wanted to nationalize the collective farms. Yeah, those weren't state property. And yeah, people were allowed to disagree with Stalin.
But Hitler looks at this and goes, no, wait a second. He looks at this and says, actually, the class struggle going on is not as a result of market forces, and this isn't on itself. He actually says this isn't right. He looks at this and goes, no, it's not. The classes exist, but that's not the reason why they are like the way they are. The reason is because of the Jews. These classes only exist because of the Jews. So what Hitler says is we will get rid of the Jews, right, from our society. The Jews are making the upper classes do what they do, and the middle class do what they do, and the workers are dumb because they are being led by the Jews, right, in Hitler's mind. So we will take the Jews out of society, and therefore these classes no longer exist in the way that they do now. This becomes the problems of the class warfare go away, and what we are left with, yes, we still have classes, but they are all one class. They are all not a class, they're a race.
So let me explain it again. You've got three classes of class warfare. When you get rid of the Jews, a racial problem. This leaves one race, one people, one class.
Right? There's still classes within it, but it's a socialism, not communism, right? We're going to seize the means of production. The Aryan race of Germans is going to seize the means of production by taking the Jews out of the equation, and we're going to live in a socialist utopia.
This is so stupid that I don't know how to respond, but I'll try. A ver, what Hitler says is that he has no problem with capitalism. He just wants people from his own race controlling it. And how is class the same thing as race? We Marxists see classes by the relation to the means of production. Do you have a factory? You are a capitalist. You have no means of production and you must sell your own labor to survive? You're a worker. In the Third Reich it's the same. You can't get rid of one race, seize the property and give it to the capitalists of your race. But classes prevail. Private property prevails. It's the same fucking thing, so it can't be socialist. They wanted capitalism without use, and they actually got it. And when you say it's socialism, not communism, what the actual fuck do you mean? I don't know, because you didn't define your terms. How convenient. And later in the video you say this.
As he says to Strasser in 1930, we don't need to nationalize the industries or take away private property because the people are the state. This is a dictatorship by the proletariat in a sense, but it's a dictatorship by the Aryan people. It is socialism. They are, as he says, we are socializing the people, therefore we don't need to seize the means of production in the communist sense, because we have seized, the Aryans have seized the means of production.
Dictatorship of the proletariat, it's when the proletariat controls the state and the means of production. Dictatorship of Aryans, it's just dictatorship of the bourgeois, because the capitalists are still in control.
You have a society that's made up of classes, but the overarching racial issue is the problem that caused the classes to be like they are in the first place. And now what you have is things like the Hitler Youth and the Braun shirts and so on. But the Hitler Youth is saying, well, you know, because this isn't just like a Boy Scout brigade. This is, the Hitler Youth is like, no, you maybe start at the bottom, but you can rise to the top, because this is socialism. That's what they're saying. And they're saying if you get rid of the bad elements, like the Jews, then these social classes are no longer a problem. You're all equal Aryans. It is socialism. It is absolutely socialism. Now, people will say, this isn't Marxist socialism. Well, neither was Leninism, and neither was Stalinism, and neither was Trotskyism. None of these were Marxists. You know, they are Marxist in theory, but Marxist theory is not Marxist practice. This is all a branch of Marxism, and National Socialism is part of that branch. They are linked. The same way that Leninism is Marxism is the same way that National Socialism is Marxism. It's the same way Trotskyism is Marxism. Same way Maoism is Marxism. They are all branches of the tree. If you imagine the root being Marx is Das Kapital, right? And then above that are the branches of the tree. Well, National Socialism is part of that tree. It is the same thing. But it's linked it's all part of the same tree, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're all equal, right? Marxist-Leninism is different to Stalinism, which is different to Trotskyism, which is different to the Labour Party in Britain, which is different to the social parties all over Europe, and different again to National Socialism, but it is still a socialism.
Everything I don't like comes from the same roots. Roots that I didn't read. I already explained what the Nazis actually thought and did, and what Marxists think about it. And you say that Marxism-leninism is different to Stalinism, quote unquote. More evidence that you have no idea what you're talking about. And that's another thing. The relevant ideology of the Soviets in the Second World War is Marxism-leninism. And you should know this. How do you not fucking know this? And if you want to prove that the basics of National Socialism comes from Das Kapital, you have to explain this. Please do.
So let's go back to the political spectrum for just 2 seconds. So capitalism is there, socialism, and then communism. So if socialism is the seizure of all means of production, which some of you are arguing, then what's communism? What's the difference? There isn't any. There is a difference though. Communism and socialism aren't necessarily the same. They are two branches of the same tree in a sense. Communism is the seizure of all means of production in this communist lovely utopia and whatever else. That is what communism is. Socialism is a halfway house between capitalism and communism, in a broad sense of the word, and it is itself a spectrum. So you can have capitalist elements in the socialism. That's kind of what it is. That's kind of the definition of it. Yeah, socialism is the halfway house between the two. And some of you say, well, the Wikipedia says, or Google said, like some guy was going, well, I gave a dictionary definition. Don't know where he got the definition from. Maybe even Marx himself. Well, it doesn't matter what Marx says. By the time you get to the 30s, when all this is going on, realistically, Marx is pretty much long gone. The theory's still there, but the practicality has dictated that his theory isn't working the way that it should. This is the problem with it, because he's kind of made it so vague, and no one really knows how to get to communism, that they're all trying to... They're going through a socialistic phase in order to get to communism because they don't know how to get there. They're going through a socialistic phase in order to get to communism because they don't know how to get there. They're going through a socialistic phase in order to get to communism because they don't know how to get there.
They're going through a socialistic phase in order to get to communism because they don't know how to get there.
No, they're not branches. And what definition? You didn't give any. And of course it doesn't matter what the primary source about Marxism says. Be quiet, Marx. You have no fucking idea what Marxism is. It doesn't matter to you because it disagrees with you. And why is it vague? How? Can you elaborate, please? It seems pretty straightforward to me. Extensive. There's a lot to read, I'll give you that. But it's easy to understand. You would know this if you had done your research. The ironic thing is that if you read Lenin, Stalin or Mao, you'll find reference to Marx everywhere for obvious reasons, but you find none in Hitler's so-called writings. And what you say about the industrialists working for the state, it was the other way around actually. Hitler even purged the Strasserist wing of his party, the only ones that kinda challenged capitalism. And about this, let's see what Otto Strasser says about Hitler. Hitler said, I have never said that all enterprises should be socialized. On the contrary, I have maintained that we might socialize enterprises prejudicial to the interests of the nation. I should consider it a crime to destroy essential elements in our economic life. Take Italian fascism. Our National Socialist state, like the fascist state, will safeguard both employers' and workers' interests while reserving the right of arbitration in case of dispute. And Strasser responds, but under fascism the problem of labor and capital remains unsolved. It has not even been tackled, it has merely been temporarily stifled. capitalism has remained intact, just as you yourself propose to leave it intact. And when Strasser presented his program to Hitler, he ranted. "It's Marxism!" cried Hitler. "In fact, it's Bolshevism! Democracy has laid the world in ruins, and nevertheless you want to extend it to the economic sphere. It would be the end of the German economy." And this is a speech by Hitler. "We National Socialists see in private property a higher level of human economic development that, according to the difference in performance, controls the management of what has been accomplished, enabling and warranting the advantage of a higher standard of living for everyone. Bolshevism destroys not only private property, but also private initiative and the readiness to shoulder responsibility. It has not been able to save millions of human beings from starvation in Russia, the greatest agrarian state in the world that is totally immune from the climate, from blight and from sabotage by landlords." The ironic thing here is that Hitler says the same shit right-wingers say about the Soviet Union. It's very funny. No, not all right-wingers are Nazis, etc. And as we've seen several times in this video, Hitler continuously defends private property of the means of production, one of the defining basics of capitalism, while ranting and raving, screeching about how he hates Marxism, Bolshevism, the concept of workers defending their interests. So he clearly hates the concepts of socialism in general and Marxism in particular. So again, he's no socialist, and neither was Nazi Germany. But if you come with childish and unsourced definition like socialism is when the government does things, you can reach to conclusions like that. I can say that the United States is a socialist country. What's their motto? In God we trust. One nation under God. They are replacing the concept of class with religion, and they want a united state for their people, the Christians. Clearly a socialist country. In conclusion, he claims to be a historian and a critical thinker. But is this really the case? Well, as we've seen, he starts from a conclusion, the Nazis were socialists, and goes back from there. He only checks sources that agree with him, mainly political pundits with a modern political agenda, and ignores other more trustworthy sources by actual historians. He claims that Mein Kampf is a primary source, and I agree, somewhat, but ignores the actual policies and government of the Nazis, while also ignoring primary sources about socialism and Marxism. He gives vague definitions about things, reducing the concepts of socialism, liberalism and conservatism to the level of state intervention. The more state intervention, the more socialist a country is. And this is not only misleading and dishonest, it's also completely stupid, for reasons I stated earlier in my video. And following that path, you can arrive to ludicrous conclusions. He is destroyed by socialists using facts and logic in his own comment section, but only responds to comments sucking his and short comments that don't challenge him while ignoring actual criticism. He then makes a response video doubling down his unsourced claims and somehow being even more wrong without addressing the main criticisms. And again, he only responds to easy comments that he feels he can debunk while linking to propaganda outlets like the Mises Institute. Yeah, they're not academics. They're propagandists who spew conspiracy theories and mislead like you did by giving vague definitions, unsourced claims and misrepresenting arguments and historical facts in the interest of their capitalist masters. And you say that you try to tackle challenging subjects? That's fine, I do that all the time too. I'm all for historical revisionism. But when you engage in it, you need to give concrete evidence and facts to support your claim and debunk the mainstream version of history, and as we've seen, you didn't do that. And you have a great responsibility to give an educated analysis, because As I've seen in the comment section of your videos, a lot of people take your word for granted and believe everything you say without doing their own research. I may have been a little too harsh, so I want to end this video with a positive note. I don't know if you swallowed all that nonsense economic flat earther propaganda before or after reaching to the Nazis equal socialists conclusion, but you have proven in other videos that you actually changed your mind when new information is presented to you. But in this case you didn't. Maybe it's because you think that you are right, since those fake conservative propagandists agree with you. So as someone that respects your work, your actions in these videos and their respective comment sections made me lose all respect. However, maybe you're a little overwhelmed and confused, so I advise you to take a week away from the internet, read other sources, and read political theory and contrast actual information. Then come back, rewatch your videos, and see what you think about them. I'm not asking you to become a Marxist. Conservative and liberal historians don't agree with you either. And this nonsense Nazis equal socialist debate, it's only a debate now because those American political brainlets of the new conservative movement want to equate everything they don't like with socialism. It's basically what it is. Anyway, I think that's all. As I've stated at the start of this video, English is not my first language and my pronunciation is Franco-tier.
Thanks to the thousands of souls who follow our movement,
And I went full Richard Petty, wanting to end this as fast as possible. So I may have missed something or didn't explain myself as good as I think. By the time I upload this, responses to TIK must be popping up like mushrooms. Most of them made by people more intelligent than me. So I link to them in the description. Feel free to roast me in the comment section, and of course, check the sources, contrast information, and think for yourself. Thanks for listening. Like, dislike. I will tell you not to subscribe because making videos in English it's not in my 5-year plan. But if you speak Spanish, I invite you to my main channel, where I stand alone fending the occasional Nazi raid. Well, that's everything. Adios.
Your video is the pinnacle of postmodernism, trying to redefine things and detaching them from the historical context in order to support your feelings. And I'm sorry, but facts don't care about your feelings.
No, mejor corto esto último.